It's pretty simple for how crazy it all sounds. Every year on Christmas Eve, for as long as I can remember, my parents drug us with sleeping pills. Something about not being awake when Santa comes. We have a whole schedule the family keeps to. Dinner at 5, at 6 we put on our pajamas and watch that shitty movie It's a Wonderful Life, and yeah, the PJs match. And then at 8:30 we all use our last bit of eggnog to wash down the pills. They're strong. My sister's out in probably 15 minutes. I take a little longer, but I'm always asleep by 9. Then we wake up the next morning, groggy but okay, and Mom gushes about everything Santa left under the tree. Because we're good. It's all bullshit. My whole life I thought this was just what you did on Christmas. You have to be asleep when Santa comes, right? Otherwise his magic doesn't work. So we took magic pills to make sure we'd be asleep. As a kid it all made sense. You don't question shit like that when presents are on the line. Your parents are the law and you don't question them either. I only started to think that it was weird when I hit middle school. By that age you don't believe in Santa anymore. Or you shouldn't. The last holdouts get mocked and the rest of us start talking about things like Xboxes and sneakers and how we're gonna get them. Me? I only had one question when the topic of Christmas came up. When did you guys stop taking the magic pills? That's a question that falls under the family business only clause, and I regretted it immediately. If any of them told their parents, I'll never know. In a bigger city with more oversight, someone would have or should have called CPS. Out here, population 5,108. Yeah, I checked. Bumfuck nowhere left of the oil fields. No one gave a shit that some kid's family was drugging them for some peace on Christmas Eve. The day I asked that question, all my friends howled with laughter while I sat there beet red and trying to play it off as a joke. That was the day I knew it wasn't normal. Last year I'd finally had enough. I got sick of the lies, sick of the matching pajamas, sick of playing pretend that we were having the perfect family Christmas. I wanted to know why my parents drug us. I had to know why. So when Mom handed me that little white pill, I hid it under my tongue and spat it in the toilet. Then I went to bed and pretended to be asleep. I listened until I heard Mom snoring to get up and look around. I wasn't surprised to see the tree stuffed with gifts already. Santa who? But that was it. I wasn't finding any secrets. Nothing unusual or weird until I saw them. I was reading the credit card statement, so sue me, they drug us, when I saw movement outside. We always have a white Christmas, and by that time the street was dead quiet. So when I saw something rush by the window, it startled me. I just about opened the front door to go look when I saw them. Lots of them, landing on the roofs one by one and crawling into the chimneys of every house. I don't even know how to properly describe them. Is that what PTSD does? Stops you from remembering things? Because I must have PTSD. I know I have it. I have to have it. I crouched by the couch, hiding behind the curtains and watching these giant red spidery things as they skittered across the rooftops. They'd reach a chimney and one by one hop in the air, tuck their legs into a line beneath them, and shoot down the chimney. They'd be gone for a few minutes and then shoot back out. Mostly with nothing. Sometimes with random items or decorations. For one brief stupid second I thought that they were maybe some fucked up version of Santa's elves until I heard the most god-awful sound. The sound that still haunts my every waking moment. Agonized screams of pure terror, wailing, crunching, grinding, the sound of someone's body being forced up the chimney. Human bodies don't fit in chimneys. Not like that. I watched in horror as the smith's daughter Maggie came up the chimney, pulled by two of those freaks of nature. By the time they pulled her out, she'd stopped screaming. I don't think she was alive by then. I hope she wasn't. Her body wasn't right. It was like a tube of toothpaste that had popped. I sat there in shock, watching the smith's roof turning pink before I felt the gravity of what I'd just seen bury me. Suddenly I knew why my parents drugged us, and I needed to get to sleep, fast. I ran straight for the bathroom and poured out 3 of those little white sleeping pills, then dove into my bed. I pulled the covers over my head and started chewing. Have you ever tried to chew pills? They're not supposed to be chewed. They taste like shit. I just about threw up twice. It didn't help that I could hear those things getting closer. You know those movies about Santa and his reindeer? About the bells and the hooves? That's them. There's no reindeer. That horrible clicking comes from them, and I knew what they did to people who weren't sleeping. Waking up on Christmas Day was awkward. Everyone else woke up for Christmas morning, and I woke up with my dad shaking me awake past noon. I could tell he wasn't impressed. But me? I was thrilled. The last time I woke up on Christmas that happy, I was like 5. After I stopped screaming, that is. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't being dragged up our chimney. But once I did, it was great. I threw myself on my dad like we were in a wrestling match. I ran downstairs, hugged my mother harder than I had in years, and then threw my sister over my shoulder. She was 8, still 100% a believer, and had been sour about waiting so long to start Christmas until I'd tickled her into submission. Happiness is contagious, and for the first time in a while I was thrilled to see a Christmas with my family. It was awesome. Until it wasn't. We'd opened stockings and exchanged gifts, and were gorging ourselves on fresh cinnamon buns and eggs Benedict when I made the mistake of glancing outside. By that point, I'd sort of convinced myself that I'd just had a crazy dream. I'd snuck off to smoke pot with one of my friends early Christmas Eve, so I figured maybe it had mixed badly with the sleeping pill. But the moment I looked outside, my eyes were drawn to the Smith's house and that pink patch on top. Suddenly, I couldn't swallow, and I drank a whole glass of milk just trying to choke down my food. It hadn't been a dream. So where were the cops? Sure, I'd gotten up late, but a kid goes missing on Christmas Eve. You'd assume that the police would be crawling the neighborhood all day. You look a little green, bud, you okay? I'd been staring out the window, feeling the pit in my stomach grow heavier and heavier when my dad jolted me to reality. I looked at him and nodded, trying to take another bite for show. Hey, have you seen the Smiths? I asked suddenly, wondering if maybe they just hadn't wanted to spoil the mood. I watched my parents take a sharp but quick glance at each other before he shook his head and smiled. Not yet. I'll let you know if I see Maggie outside, though, he teased with a wink, grabbing my shoulder and giving it a squeeze as he left the table. Mom gave me a kind smile and poured me another glass of milk. I probably sat there for another hour before I finally gave up and went to help my sister set up her new dollhouse. I needed the distraction. When winter break ended, I was back at school, expecting to see an uproar that never came. Freshman year of high school, a kid had gotten into a car accident, and the entire student body held a vigil for him. There was a memorial in the auditorium, meetings after school to light candles, and the school even brought in a couple therapists. Nobody said or did anything like that for Maggie. It was like everybody just kind of forgot that she existed, and it was strange. Hell, even the local newspaper seemed to skip it, and they had absolutely nothing to report on most days. It took until mid-January before I spotted a tiny obituary tucked in the corner of a back page. I saved it, stuffing it in a notebook at home for safekeeping. It almost felt like if I didn't remember she'd died, no one would. Honestly, the whole incident took a toll. March came and went, and so did my birthday. I was 17 now, supposed to be focusing on planning for college, but all I could think about was Christmas. I could barely sleep. Every night I'd go to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, jumping at every little snap or crack. Every morning I'd wake up with darker bags under my eyes than the day before. I couldn't focus in school. My grades dropped. My parents started asking about drugs. By the end of October, I'd had no less than 8 visits with the student counselor, who kept gently asking me if things were okay at home. What could I say? No, Miss Andrews, I saw Christmas spiders pull a girl out of a chimney and it makes it hard to do math. Right. I couldn't tell anyone. How do you talk about shit like this? I sounded crazy in middle school when I tried to ask my friends about being drugged on Christmas Eve. I'd definitely get locked up if I talked about giant red spiders taking people in the night, but I was losing my mind. We had Thanksgiving. Halloween was coming, and the colder it got, the more anxious I got. The stores were already running clearance on costumes and jack-o'-lanterns to make room for ornaments. The first signs of Christmas were already seeping in, and I was absolutely, without a doubt, terrified for my life. That's when my friends called me to hang out. It might sound stupid, but my friends and I have a code we use when things are bad and we need to talk. We definitely drifted apart in high school. None of us really hung out that much together anymore, but none of us had ever backed out when someone said they needed to smoke. I was exhausted, but I figured the worst I'd get was some weed out of it. Besides, when the bat signal goes up, you gotta answer it. Roll it right or don't roll it at all, man, Ella complained, watching Greg scowl while trying to ready a joint. We were huddled in the woods behind the school, freezing our asses off in the early cold snap. Max groaned and snatched everything away from him, making quick work of it, and then lighting up. Christ, finally. Okay. He breathed out smoke with a sigh before passing the joint to the left. So it's been one hell of a year, right? Max was always the type for speeches. I sat there shivering and waiting for my share, staring at the ground. We haven't had much time to, hang out. And even though I've been busy, you guys are still my best friends. Even one day when I go off to Hollywood and become famous, I will always love all of you. There were groans all around, and Max waved us off, coughing a little and laughing. So, that love is why I called us together. I think we all know why we're here. Hayden. He paused as Ella finally passed me the joint. This is like an intervention. I didn't even get to smoke before I choked and coughed from surprise. We're really worried about you, Ella added gently, putting a hand on my arm. Don't be, I mumbled, taking a drag. I glanced back at the school. I'd been fired from my job, so my car wasn't insured. I'd gotten a ride there with Max. If I wanted to leave, I'd have to walk home, and it was too cold for that. Come on, talk to us, bro. You've just disappeared. We never see you. We're worried. Don't be. People think you're gonna shoot up the school. God, I thought we agreed not to tell him that, Ella squeaked, covering her face as Greg just shrugged. Someone has to. You guys suck. I stood up to leave. I was already stressed and running on no sleep. Now I was fucking embarrassed too. People thought I was going to shoot up the school? Did my friends think that? I didn't even like killing bugs. Stop. Just stop. Max grabbed my arm and pulled me back down, passing me the joint. Just relax. Come on, we're your friends. When Ella's parents divorced, what did we do? We smoked and talked. Greg's dog died, we smoked and talked. You're not the Hayden we know. So talk to us. I sat on the stump, fidgeting and staring at the ground until I was high enough to be brave enough to try and tell them the truth. What did I have to lose? They thought I was crazy anyways. You guys remember in middle school, when I talked about magic pills? The Santa pills, she asked slowly, squinting at me. I mean, yeah, I guess. What about it? They weren't magic pills, they were sleeping pills. Ever since I can remember, my parents have drugged me and my sister on Christmas Eve. I thought it was normal. They told me they were magic pills to make sure we were all asleep so that Santa... I stopped and groaned, rubbing my face and trying not to wuss out. So that Santa would come. Because he doesn't come when you're awake. I saw Greg clamp a hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Ella shot him a dirty look and elbowed him hard, then smiled at me. Fuck, this is stupid. Never mind. No, it's not. Keep going. Come on, we want to hear. I took a deep breath in and closed my eyes. I hated closing my eyes. If I closed my eyes and thought about it, I could see it all happening again. I could hear Maggie's screams again. Last year, I didn't take mine. I wanted to see what happens, what they're hiding. And I saw these things. They climb all over the houses, they go down people's chimneys, and they take people who aren't sleeping. You guys remember Maggie? That's how she died. I saw them take her. I heard her screams. It's all I can think about. I didn't realize it, but by the end of the story, I was crying. A dam had broken somewhere inside me. I scrubbed my tears away with my sleeve. I could see Greg had stopped laughing, but I couldn't look at any of their faces. I was too embarrassed. I sounded nuts. All I could do was examine the bucket we'd flipped over to use as a table. It was old, from Rona, beat up. It was cracked. It was... They never found her body, Max said with a strained voice. I know Maggie's brother. Not well, but we talked. He said they were all sleeping. No one heard anything. They never found the body. They moved in the summer. What? How'd I miss that? I spent way more time than I should have staring at their house. I should have noticed. Yeah, in August. He DM'd me and said they were moving, and that was it. We all sat there in shocked silence for a little bit, until Ella piped up. So how do you know your parents drug you? She asked with a frown. Like those magic pills could be candy or something, and it's just that placebo effect thing happening to you. I saw the prescription bottle. Besides, you feel weird the next day. Feel weird how? Fuzzy? We all turned to Greg. He'd largely been silent, but now he looked nervous, passing the joint without taking a puff. We were all done, actually. silently but unanimously voting to put it out. You wake up groggy. You know when you get woken up in the middle of the night? Like that, only it's morning, and you just sleep through the night. I've never woken up on Christmas Eve. Ever. The more I talked, the more both he and Ella looked alarmed. Do your parents drug you too? No, Ella barked, almost sounding offended. No, I don't think so. Grandma makes us this tea though every Christmas Eve. It's supposed to calm us down, so we sleep. Well, as she described it, she scrunched her face up and tugged on her ponytail. Fuck. They're drugging us too. Greg looked downright sick. He didn't say it, but from the look on his face, he'd been sleeping way too well on Christmas Eve too. I take Ambien Sue. They don't really need to, Max said with a shrug. By now Ella was pacing. Okay, so they're drugging us. But why? I mean, listen, I believe you saw what you saw, but couldn't it have been a hallucination? Why isn't this widespread news? You mean news like Maggie disappearing? I asked. I live right across the street and the cops didn't even show up. No one cared that Maggie died. No one talked about it. No wonder they moved. We all just pretended like she didn't exist. The shamed silence that followed stretched on until Greg's phone buzzed, and he announced that he had to go to work. Ella did too. They both worked at the same fast food place. They gave us a half-hearted goodbye. I was exhausted, completely emotionally drained after spilling my guts, and Max offered to drive me home soon after the others left. It was a silent ride. He seemed deep in thought, and I was so tired I didn't even want to try and talk. It didn't matter, I'd told them. They could think I was crazy all they wanted. I found money on the counter for pizza at home and put in a Domino's order before finding something to watch. The entire time I sat there, all I could think about was Maggie and how she just disappeared from our little town the moment she was snatched. It was like those things had just wiped her off the map and everyone let it happen. I remembered the obituary halfway through dinner and ran upstairs to dig out the notebook I'd put it in. It wasn't long, that's for sure. Her family had barely put in any description in at all. Like all obituaries, they had put down the date of her death, and that gave me a sudden idea. I started searching. Our town was small and rural, but we did have a newspaper, and it had managed to get a grant a few years ago to make a website and start digitizing everything. That meant that they had decades worth of obituaries to look through. I started to search for any deaths around Christmas. Deaths in December weren't unusual, even in a small town. Between icy roads causing grandma to fall or depression taking lives, death was expected at Christmas. But when I started to dig through my results, I noticed a serious difference between the Nana eats shit deaths and the ones that happened right on Christmas itself. They were all short, with few details, and all were published weeks after the event. There were never any funerals or memorial services to be had. No options to send flowers somewhere. It seemed like every year at least one person died under strange circumstances at Christmas and just became invisible. I made a list of the last few deaths and started searching for their families. Just like the Smiths, most of the families had moved away after the death. I scoured social media pages for more clues. No one that had left seemed to keep ties with anyone in our little town. In fact, many of the families hadn't been in the town long before the death had happened. If I thought about the Smiths, they had only moved here a few months before last Christmas. It wasn't uncommon for families to move here for the oil opportunities, make some money, and then leave when they realized there wasn't much to do. It wouldn't have looked unusual if you didn't know that someone had died. I sat back, shoveling in the last couple slices of cold pizza. Why hadn't I looked this up before? I'd spent most of 2022 trying to forget what I'd seen but being too scared to let it go. All I could think of was Christmas and what I knew would happen when I was asleep. I'd nearly failed out of school. I'd lost my job. Okay, it was a shitty one, but still. I was this close to losing any opportunities for a good college. But worse than that, I was probably the only person who had seen what comes on Christmas Eve and lived to talk about it. That gave me a responsibility, right? I knew what they looked like and what they did. And now, I knew that this had been going on for years. My parents had been drugging me since I was born, so they must have known about it. They grew up here. They had to know. The Smiths had only been in town for a few months. Maybe nobody warned them. Maybe they just went to bed like normal, never knowing the risks. Shit. Why had no one told them? I pulled out my phone, texting Max. I needed him to hook me up with Maggie's brother. I needed to know what happened after she died. Then I messaged everyone on Facebook in one big group chat. There were some families that had lived here for generations and had still had people die. I had the perfect idea on how to contact them. We were going trick or treating this year. Trying to talk to Maggie's brother had been a waste of time. I wasn't totally shocked, but I was disappointed. I thought he was actually going to talk to me at first. It had been going fine, even after mentioning how crazy it was that no one talked about his sister's death, when suddenly he stopped replying and blocked me. Blocked me on Insta, on Facebook, and when I tried calling his cell, I got that annoying number not in service robot voice. After that happened, I filled my friends in on why we were going trick-or-treating. It wasn't exactly a popular request, but everyone seemed to agree to it out of pure loyalty. Normally at 17 you went to a party and got drunk, mostly because people didn't really love handing out candy to teenagers. This year we'd hit the streets. Someone's gonna call the cops on us. My dad will kill me if he finds out about this. Greg looked paranoid like usual. I couldn't blame him. His parents were super religious and thought costumes were... Honestly, I don't know. They just thought it was wrong. We'd had to keep a cape and plastic fangs for him at Max's house where we all got ready. We each opted for something quick and easy. Greg was a vampire. Ella was a witch. Max put on a cowboy hat and I dressed like a ghost. They weren't good costumes, but they were costumes. How'd you convince your parents to let you come out tonight anyways? He held up a plastic bag filled with religious pamphlets. I said I was called to spread the word. So what's the plan? We hit a few houses and try and get candy so we look legit, and then we go to the houses on my list. I answered, pulling out a list and a map where I'd marked everyone down. And you're just going to ask them about their murdered family member? What if there's kids? I plan on showing them this. I pulled out a piece of lined paper with a drawing of one of the creatures. They all stared at it. Don't spiders have like 8 legs? There's only 4. I rolled my eyes and put it back in my bag. I said spidery. They're not actual spiders. Okay, Picasso. Ella laughed as we headed off into the night. We got turned away from a few houses, but people were surprisingly generous most of the time. We got a couple glad to see teenagers doing something wholesome comments, and it didn't take us long to get into it. It was nice. Trick-or-treating with my friends brought back a lot of memories and good feelings. Every time we stopped to compare notes on our haul, it felt like we were kids again. It gave me just a glimmer of hope before we hit the first target house. We waited on the street for the big group of kids to get their candy and hustle on, before stepping up to the plate and ringing the bell. Trick or treat. The door swung open and we all smiled like fools. The woman inside, a lady that looked to be in her 50s, gave us a confused smile back and grabbed her candy bowl. I held up my art the moment the peanut butter cups hit the pillowcase. Do you recognize this? I asked. She paused, looked over my shitty drawing and then shook her head. No, I don't. But it's very nice. You kids have a good Halloween. I didn't even have time to react. The next group of kids were already pushing us out, and so we walked back to the street. Okay, that didn't work, I sighed, opening up a snack-sized bag of chips. Do we believe her? Ella asked, doing the same. We all started walking and eating, the salt cutting the handfuls of candy we'd already stuffed ourselves with. Yeah, I don't think she's seen them. She didn't even blink. So maybe you gotta go harder next time. If no one's seen those things, it won't mean a thing to them. Ask them about the deaths. So I did. The next house was polite as could be considering the question. The house after slammed the door in our faces. The house after that actually took their candy back before rattling the door on its hinges. It was going honestly pretty terrible. No pumpkins. Porch light is off. Bummer. It was getting late and we'd agreed to go to Max's house for curfew to watch movies. I'd only marked off a plan for 10 houses, and we'd reached our limit. The last house was a dead end. Anyone have a pen? I asked suddenly, a last-ditch idea coming to mind. Greg dug through his pamphlet bag and gave me one, and I crouched on the sidewalk to write a quick note on the back of the drawing. I left my phone number and an explanation and slipped it through the rusty old mail slot on the door. It was old, loud, and nearly bit my fingers off trying to get the paper through. Once I saw it disappear, we started to leave. We got nearly a house away before a hoarse yell stopped us. Looking back, a woman that had to be at least in her 80s was waving at us from the place we'd just been. "Get over here," she squawked, the paper clutched in her hand. We all froze, sharing nervous glances. I guess some part of me didn't really believe anyone would recognize it. If no one recognized it, then the issue would be moot. I could say I'd done what I could and just start therapy to deal with what I saw. Instead, we all made our way back, meeting the woman on her stoop. "Get inside, it's cold out," she ordered, stepping aside and motioning us through. "Shoes off, sit down." What looked like no lights on from the outside was actually the thickest blackout curtains I'd ever seen. Every window we could see was completely covered and barred. When she shut the door, she locked it and braced it with a chair. Not that I think it really mattered. The thing looked like an industrial security door from the inside. What really stood out to me, though, and what I couldn't stop staring at, was her fireplace. It just didn't really exist anymore. She'd filled the bottom with cement, gated it, and wrapped the gate with barbed wire. "So you've been awake on Christmas Eve, it seems. Must have been quite the fright. When?" I was in shock. She sat comfortably on a recliner just across from us, a shotgun stuffed in what looked like a magazine holder. "Well, last year," I stuttered out. She just nodded, looking over the drawing carefully. I had to know why. "They give us pills." "Pills? Goodness, that's ripe for trouble. Back in my day, you got an infusion, or Dad let you sneak some alcohol, anything to hide it. I guess your parents bought into that never lie to your kids crap the magazine started shilling." She clucked her tongue, tucking the piece of paper into her pocket. "Look where it got them. Do they know?" I shook my head quickly. I didn't think they knew. Well, you're lucky. There's not a lot of lucky ones that see the creatures and live to talk about it. Most anyone who does gets their death." "Up the chimney," I practically whispered, and her face softened. "Poor kid. You must live near that girl that died. There was just one last year, I believe. I'm sorry, dear. That's just something no one should ever see." Beside me, Greg, Max, and Ella had all sunken into themselves. Ella looked like she might throw up at any second. "So it's real?" she asked, pulling off her fake nose. "They're real?" The woman gave a solemn nod. She gave us a thin-lipped smile before getting up, returning moments later with a box of papers. "You probably already know this, but my name is Rosalie Walsh, Rosie for short. My family's lived here for generations now. My sister, God rest her soul, was the most recent member of my family to die in that awful way. She'd been on a new medication. Didn't realize it was basically amphetamines. By the time she realized she wasn't getting to sleep there, just wasn't anything she could do about it. Told me as much in the letter she left. There's an empty grave in her name at the cemetery. There's a lot of empty graves. Empty urns. Lots of families in this town never get to bury their loved ones." She dug through the box and pulled out an album of family photos. There were several photos with red dots next to them, and I realized that they were people that had been taken. "So you never find the bodies?" "No, and having seen it happen myself, I guess it's as much a blessing as a curse." "Where do the bodies go?" asked Max, twisting and turning the book, flipping pages and frowning at the growing list of red dots. "Don't know. Lots of rumor and conjecture on that one. Some folks say they're eaten. Bathroom's down the hall and to the left, kid." She pointed at Greg, who was green by then, and he gratefully ran off through the house. Like I said, some folks think they get eaten. Other folks think they're taken somewhere. Some of the more airy-fairy fools think that they're taken to some sort of fantasy land, the real Santa's workshop, that they're all up there living in bliss. I think if they'd seen what a person looks like after going up a chimney, there wouldn't be any magical thinking left. "So what are they?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Look through here," she ordered, passing me the box and kicking the recline function into gear. "I'm no expert, not a history major or archaeology anything. I went to school for accounting, but I was your age when I took an interest in it. Woke up at just the wrong time. Guess my father didn't put enough whiskey in my drink that night. Instead of waking up Christmas morning, I woke up close to midnight. Heard the hooves. Could have sworn I heard the bells. The sound of the ornaments clinking on the tree. Doesn't matter how old you are, if you think you hear Santa on Christmas Eve, you get up to look. So I did. Crept out real slow, real quiet. I got just to the edge of the living room when I saw them, those nasty things. Disgusting creatures. They had my little brother and they..." She paused, taking in a sharp breath and resting her fingers on her face, a little shake to her voice. God, 60 years and it still gets me. They put him up the chimney. A couple go up the top, hold on to the head. The other shoves from the bottom. He was awake. He screamed. Lord, he screamed. Finally, she just waved her hand a little, as if trying to wave away the memory, her eyes wet. Couldn't do nothing. I was too scared. I went back to bed, hid under the covers, but it was fine. Once they get awaker, they leave. They got what they came for. I didn't sleep for years, still don't, not really. While she talked, Ella and I rifled through the box. There were dates, times, letters written from strangers describing what they'd seen. There were drawings too, much better than mine, but all displaying something similar. The collection went back through the years. What's this? I asked, holding up a photo of a roof. It looked like someone made a mistake taking the photo. All you saw was a snowy roof and these strange white smears. That's how they show up on camera. The only reason we know what they look like is eyewitness accounts. Even video doesn't capture them. They end up looking like glitter. She heaved a big sigh, eyes on the ceiling, face looking suddenly more gaunt and drawn than when we'd first seen her. They always come in threes. Never seen a house without three. They always come down the chimney. They take the first waker they come across. One per house, only one per house. Then they leave on to the next and so on, until every house has been hit. Can't we just close up the chimneys? Max asked, pointing to the cement job she'd done on hers. Won't that just solve it all? What about apartments? You ever seen an apartment in this town, kid? She asked, eyeing him carefully. We all paused, taking a moment to think. There's an ordinance here. This town has strict rules about what can be built. No apartments. Most you'll see is a duplex, all with fireplaces. She was right. There wasn't an apartment anywhere within the boundaries of the town. Even double-story houses were weird. If someone built something other than the usual flat single-story home, you could guarantee the neighbors would gossip. It was too flashy. Every family handles it differently. My parents told us after my brother went missing. Felt it wasn't fair we didn't know after that. Some folks don't tell their kids until it's time for them to move out. Figure they want to preserve what innocence they have. Not everyone handles it well when they find out. My eldest son John had a fire in his belly and didn't believe us. Said we just wanted to keep him home. That was a hard Christmas. My husband and I had the kids help clean the roof after. Did it hurt them? Sure did. But they believed after that. They're all still alive. At some point Greg had returned, and then left again at mention of cleaning the roof. The rest of us sat there in numb silence as Rosie talked. Finally, the memories seemed to take their toll on her. Time's up, kids. Halloween is over, she announced, straightening up and taking the box back. The best I can suggest is that you take those pills. Take enough. Sleep through. Try and pretend you don't know what you know. She cleared her throat and held out her hand. Reese's. We all stood there like deer in headlights before someone snapped out of it and dropped a couple candies in her hand. Honestly, it seemed fair. We all paid our toll and she walked us to the door. Here, one last treat. I don't know what they are, but I know they aren't anything holy. She dropped a thick notebook in my pillowcase and patted me on the shoulder, then gently shoved us out the door and slammed it behind us. We barely made curfew that night, not that it mattered. Max's parents were pretty lax, and his eldest sister was still out partying by the time we got to his house. Someone voted to order a pizza. Someone else voted to put a movie on. We ended up settling on watching The Little Mermaid. Laugh all you want, but it was the only thing we could agree on. Not one of us wanted to watch anything scary after hearing what Rosie had to say. After that, we didn't talk for a couple weeks. It was like we all silently but mutually agreed that we couldn't be around each other after we'd learned the truth about Christmas in our little town. I couldn't even open the book that Rosie gave me. I hid it under my bed, gave my candy to Sarah, and stopped all my research. I didn't want to even think about it. And for the first time since Christmas last year, I managed to sleep. Until a couple weeks ago. That was when Ella called me up. Someone new had moved into town at the start of December, a family with 3 kids. They live a couple doors down from her and she'd been watching them like a hawk. She wanted to see what the neighbors would do. Normally, the welcoming committee came by with some sort of shitty gift basket and cheap plastic key to the city. But there was no one. Not even the nosy old lady that lived across the street dropped by. "I think they're sacrificing them," she'd said once we had all gotten together on those ice-cold stumps behind the school for a smoke. "That's why the cops don't come. That's why the newspapers don't run any stories. That's why no one fucking talks about our town after they leave. If everyone that's lived here all their lives knows you have to stay asleep, there's no one to take. So they need new people to come. They need people for the spiders to take. So we've been prepping, researching, making plans. Maybe we're crazy, but something about watching the entire town just hang these people out to dry, knowing what's going to come, makes us all sick. We're all graduating soon and we all plan on leaving, but we're not letting this happen again this year without a fight. Someone has to do something. There has to be some revenge for people like Rosie, for Maggie. It's Christmas Eve. Everything is in place and now we're just waiting. Everyone's at home. My parents are making cookies. Ella's helping her family make a gingerbread house. We're all doing something. Just waiting for everyone to go to sleep. Wish us luck." "I think they're sacrificing them," she'd said once we had all gotten together on those ice-cold stumps behind the school for a smoke. "That's why the cops don't come. That's why the newspapers don't run any stories. That's why no one fucking talks about our town after they leave. If everyone that's lived here all their lives knows you have to stay asleep, there's no one to take. So they need new people to come. They need people for the spiders to take. So what do we do?" That was the question, right? What do we do? Honestly, I wish I would have posted here earlier. Right around when we started to talk about doing something about this would have been helpful and saved some of the suffering you guys are about to see. But I'm a slow writer, and by Christmas Eve it felt like I was staring down the barrel of a gun. I didn't know if I'd make it out alive, and it felt like someone had to know what was going on outside of our little town before we walked into hell. Mostly it was just nice to get some outside support, to know that we're not crazy, that what's going on is as fucked as we think it is. And, yeah, I still think It's a Wonderful Life is a shit movie. Sorry, I'm doubling down on that. When you spend your whole life using it as a marker for pills are next, it starts to lose its charm. Ella thinks I'm a shithead too for saying it sucks, if that's any consolation. Some of you guys were wondering about Thanksgiving in October. I live in Canada. It's just a different holiday here. I have cousins in Detroit that hype American Thanksgiving like it's some crazy event. I think I'm going to join them. So what do? We can't just let it happen to them. I can tell you the moment Ella started talking about it, we all groaned and shut down. "Not the Christmas spiders again," moaned Greg. Frankly, none of us were really into talking about the Christmas spiders again. Not after Halloween. Certainly not while stoned. Max just heaved a sigh and put the freshly rolled joint back in his little stash case. He closed it, patted it, and then sat back. I zipped up my coat even tighter. Ella, meanwhile, was fuming. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I ruining your pretend world of cheer? The town is sacrificing people on Christmas." I cringed, glancing over at Max, who quickly shook his head and dipped his chin. Ella was fired up. She got this way any time she found a cause to roar about. Last year it was overseas dog adoption. The year before that was her rally cry against GMO farming. It went all the way back to the 4th grade and her science fair project on microplastics. To be fair, I don't think she'd ever actually been really wrong in the past. All the topics were worth talking about. She just terrified us in the process. In 2 weeks we all go to sleep and have a nice Christmas while the Millers get dragged out of bed by 4-legged freaks. And you're all just okay with that? Of course not. There were objections all around until we heard Greg mumbling. Ella towered over him while he focused on his gloves. "Well?" I said it's all just devil worship anyways. He mumbled a little louder after clearing his throat. "That's what my parents said." "Oh, hell no. You told your parents?" Now it was my turn to be worked up. If we hadn't all known him since kindergarten, I think we would have strung him up the power lines from his shoes. Rule number 1, you don't tell your parents. Rule number 2, you don't tell Greg's weirdo religious freak parents. They found my candy okay, I was pissed. Apparently shortly after Halloween, Greg's mother had been going through his room when a fun-sized candy wrapper triggered an all-out scrub of the premises. She found the bag of pamphlets still full, and worse than that, found the rest of his candy haul. In the massive argument that followed, Greg had thrown out the only weapon he had. that they drugged him on Christmas Eve. They didn't talk for days. His parents prayed and he relished in the silence until they came with Bibles in hand and sat him down for a reckoning. The town was evil. We were all devil worshippers, and they did what they had to in order to keep the family safe. "Why don't they, just move then?" Max asked after Greg rambled out their speech about straying from God. "They don't have to live here." I asked them that too. They didn't really answer. "We're not doing Christmas this year, though. It's too pagan." "Serves you right," Ella scoffed, taking her stump again. "Jackass." "Whatever, I'm not supposed to hang out with you guys anyways." Greg got up and stomped off. We were all upset. So much so that after Greg left, so did the rest of us. The impromptu meeting on the Christmas spiders died before it really got off the ground. The comments about devil worship, though, that stuck with me. I went home and went straight for my room, grabbing Rosie's notebook I'd hidden away. I hadn't looked through it yet. I hadn't wanted to. Finding out the truth had been so exhausting that I was pretty game to just take my magic pill and pretend I had no idea why we did it, and just go to sleep on Christmas Eve as usual. Then I could move away next year and never come back. Unfortunately, Ella had a point. There was something totally fucked up about the way our town handled Christmas. Now that we knew, and could practically see them serving this new family up on a plate, it felt gross. It wasn't just scary. It felt fundamentally morally wrong. Before Rosie gave me the notebook, she'd made a comment that the spiders weren't anything holy. Thinking about what Greg's parents had said, I started to wonder. The town we live in is basically an old mining community. We have a whole shitty wannabe museum dedicated to the town's history. I'd been there dozens of times on school field trips. Some random guy back in the day staked his claim in the woods and, wouldn't you know it, founded a mine nearby with a nice rich deposit of coal. There were coal seams out the ass. He got wealthy and built the town. Decades later, oil drills started coming into the area. That's who provides half of the jobs here, the oil company. People definitely don't leave this place because there's no money in the area. For the first time, I started to think that it was maybe weird how financially well off the town is. We don't even have homeless people. That's strange, right? I thought about my parents. My mom is a florist. My dad repairs radios. When my sister was born, they both took a year off work. I've spent enough time on Reddit to know that's not normal. I thought about my friend Max. He's into music. He's 17 and probably has $10,000 worth of music equipment. He's got turntables, amps, guitars, everything. But he lives with his retired grandparents. Everyone in Ella's family plays sports. Lots of sports. They travel for games and have the best of everything. All our school teams have the best of everything. Greg's parents too. They have multiple cars and the fanciest yard in the city. It's no wonder they refused to move. They could judge the town all they wanted, but they were living off of the sins just the same. I looked at my iPhone, my MacBook, the consoles in the corner, my widescreen TV, and a closet full of Nikes. With shame, it dawned on me that this wasn't normal. I finally took a deep breath and cracked open the cover of Rosie's notebook. I did a quick flip through and then started at the top. You could tell she'd taped and rebound the thing multiple times over the years. Photos, drawings, newspaper snippets, and pages from other books had been stapled, taped, and glued in wherever they fit. Amidst all that were her notes, scrawling loops of annotations in corners, and what looked like the pages of a diary. Her diary. The diary she kept while she tried to discover the town's horrible holiday secret. December 2nd, 1962. I came back. I said I'd never come back, but here I am. Dad's sick. The cancer has taken hold of him, and Mom said this might be his last Christmas, so I came back. Anne said Daddy's eyes just lit up when Mom told him I was coming home for Christmas. It feels so strange being back. I almost forgot how wonderful this place feels when you're here. The snow, the happy faces, the way they decorate every street to the nines, and put up that big beautiful spruce in the town square. I have never figured out where they get such a big tree from. Standing beneath it, I feel like a little girl again. December 10th, 1962. Mom invited Stuart Walsh over to bake cookies. Can you believe her? That woman just does not know how to mind her own business. Suddenly she gets lightheaded and has to sit down, so I'm the one stuck rolling out the cookie dough with him. I'm embarrassed for her. Although I hate to admit it, and I will not tell her, it was nice to see him again. It's been years. He finally grew into his ears. December 24th, 1962. I'm having trouble breathing. All I can think of is what's to come. We hung up the stockings as usual, and I put up George's. Mom always makes us put up George's stocking. Every time I touch that thing, all I can think of is that night and the way he screamed. I hate her. I hate her for making me do this. What if I wake up? I shouldn't have come back. December 12th, 1965. I'm so nervous. I don't know why I let that man convince me to stay in this town. I had my chance to leave. Now I'm here with a newborn and Christmas is coming. Mom gave me her recipe to put the baby to sleep. She said the physician suggested it when I was that age and it never failed her. God, am I really going to do this? December 26th, 1984. John's dead. He's gone. He's gone. He's gone. I've failed him. I've failed all my children. I should have never stayed in this horrid place. I should have made Stuart move with me back to Toronto. Every time he visited with me, he loved it. But that man has a way of sweet-talking me. Spun me a romantic story about raising our kids where we grew up. Small-town values. What bullshit. I fell for the oldest trick in the book and now my son is gone. My baby, my sweet baby. My baby's gone. I'll never forgive myself for this for as long as I live. June 28th, 1987. Well, I did it. Today I put my big girl panties on and I did it. No one wanted me there. I don't think anyone's wanted me in this town since John died. I'm a troublemaker, because I talk about it. Kicked out of the Garden Society. Kicked out of the PTA. Well, they have to take me. I'm a tax-paying citizen. I'm owed my right to speak. So at today's town hall, I let everyone jaw on about their bake sales and their Canada Day plans, and then I stood up and let them have it. Why do we allow our family to die on Christmas Eve? Diary. You should have seen their faces. Stricken, the lot of them. I went down the line, listed the names of everyone in that room who had someone stolen on Christmas Eve, asked them how they liked their empty coffins. I even turned around and asked the mayor if he was willing to donate someone to the cause this year. After all, the town stands there and does nothing. The mayor's practically co-signing it. Oh, I was escorted out, but it was worth it. September 15th, 1990. Allison moved out today. She's starting her new life. After we dropped her off at the airport, we went straight for the hardware store. I wanted this done years ago, but Stuart wanted to wait until the kids were gone, so it didn't make them uncomfortable. Tonight he blocks up the chimney. Those soulless vultures will never step foot in this home again. December 25th, 1990. It worked. Oh, the neighbors gave us the hairy eye when they saw Stuart hauling cement to the roof, but he never stopped. If ever the town gossiped about us before they did it double time the moment we shut that hellhole up. Probably tripled when we barred the windows. Stuart's friend is a physician. We did it right, tested it for weeks, figured out just how much we need to inject to go to sleep quickly and not meet God. Sounds crazy, but you need a backup plan. Then on Christmas Eve, we drew the curtains and waited. Once the sound started, I just about turned into a teenager again. I shook so bad the bed vibrated. Stuart had to hold me in place. We heard them on the roof, crawling around like the vermin they are. Then they tried the chimney. Oh, they scratched around like cats in the dirt. Then they just moved on. Left. Later, we heard the distant screams of someone not asleep. I don't know if we'll stay up every year. I don't think I can handle hearing the poor souls as they take them. But I feel a sense of peace knowing they won't come into my home ever again. January 18th, 1991. We're pariahs now. Well, mostly me. Stuart still has his friends. No one wants to talk to me. They blame me for influencing him. Stuart stands up for me. No one will say anything in front of him, but I hear it. Whispers. Gossip. We're selfish. Hurting the town. The town already took too much from me. They can suffer. I won't play this game anymore. There were dozens more entries. I wrote out the ones that seemed to be the most interesting. Rosie's husband died just a couple years later. With him gone, the only way to get any work done in her home was to hire someone outside of the town. No one said hello. No one visited. There were no casseroles when she was sick. No one to mow her lawn. Reading Rosie's diary, I learned just how cruel our town could be. We were probably the first people to go visit her in years. I brought the notebook with me the next day when I dragged Ella out to the town square. I wanted to see the tree. The town still put up a gigantic tree every Christmas. I'd stopped going, but my parents still dragged my sister there every year. Honestly, everyone sort of dragged themselves there every year. The lighting of the tree was a big event that kicked off the whole Christmas season. "People are jerks," Ella said, reading while we walked. "It looks like people left letters in her mail slot for years. That's how she got all this. No one would talk to her, but she was the only one they could tell." I elbowed her, and we both came to a halt, looking up at the heavily decorated Christmas tree just a few feet in front of us. How the hell did they manage to decorate that much tree? It must have had hundreds of ornaments on it. "It's beautiful," she whispered in awe for a moment before her face fell. "Christmas isn't the same, is it?" I shook my head. No, it wasn't. It would never be the same. I spotted a worker adjusting the garland on a light post nearby. "Hey, the tree looks awesome." The man beamed with pride. I could feel the bile rise in my throat. "Where do you guys get such a huge tree? It's massive." "Raleigh's Tree Farm," he announced with a grin. "Best trees in the country." It didn't take long to Google Maps up the location of Rowley's Tree Farm. Ella and I went to get Max, Greg wasn't talking to us, and borrow his truck for the 40-minute drive out of town. The tree farm itself didn't seem like a regular farm so much as a big-ass forest surrounded by fence. A fading billboard with a chipmunk dressed as Santa announced our arrival. I guess that was Raleigh. "Wait, stop," Ella said as we got out. She dug around in her bag before pulling out a wrapped bundle of sage and a lighter. "My grandma gave this to me. I'm supposed to use it when I feel like the energy is off. The energy is definitely off here." She lit the bundle until it smoked, then started to swirl it around herself before motioning me over. I paused, not really big on superstitions. "Isn't that bad for our lungs?" I asked. Ella looked at me like I was nuts. It probably wasn't a great argument, all considering. Max shoved me aside and held his arms out. "Fuck, man, Ella's nan is like 100% Native American. I'm like trusting the old lady. Load me up." Max stood there relishing in his own spiritual experience until Ella pointed the lighter at me. "Fine," I muttered, stepping forward and letting her blow the smoke on me. I don't even know why I balked. We were at a tree farm on the trail for the truth about people stealing Christmas spiders. I probably needed to bathe in the stuff morning, noon, and night. After getting right, we walked around outside of the fence, searching for a way in. The giant chipmunk hadn't indicated any business hours, so it didn't seem like it was the type of place people just went to buy a tree. I figured they must have wholesaled to those tree sellers you see in parking lots. They were the spirit Halloween of Christmas, that and Hickory Farms. Eventually we found a gate. It was locked with a big chain looped around it. I pulled on the lock. "Oh, that's secure," Max scoffed, yanking on the chain. The chain was so long that if you tugged the gate far enough, you could just slide under and through. We all made our way through and started to trudge through the many rows of trees. We trudged, threw a couple snowballs, laughed and joked, then trudged some more. We kept hiking through trees, and even more trees. "Where are the big trees?" Ella finally asked, saying what we were all thinking. We'd been walking through dozens of average-looking trees for the last 20 minutes with no giants in sight, not even a leftover stump. The tree farm was huge. If they grew giant trees like the one in our town square, I couldn't see where. All you could see were what looked like hundreds of normal trees, packed with snow. There weren't any workers, no sign of an office. "Fuck!" Max broke our silence and chased it with what I can only describe as a shriek. Then he was gone. Ella and I panicked. One minute we were all turning and looking at the world of evergreen around us. The next, Max poofed. "Hayden! Ella!" We could hear him. Ella chased our footprints in the snow and started following his, stepping wide around each dragging footprint he had left behind. "Max!" she called, and I followed her. "Max!" "I'm good." Suddenly we saw his hand waving above the snow line. We got to the edge of a cliff. Well, kind of. Max had fallen off the edge of some sort of sharp hill, which luckily wasn't a drop to his death, just an awkward drop out of view. Ella crouched down and I peered over the edge. He'd fallen into a fluffy snow pile and was laughing awkwardly, red in the face. "My grandma always says I need to look where I'm going more." I couldn't help but heave a big sigh of relief. Then Ella smacked me in the chest. Ow, Jesus, why oh? She'd pulled her mitt off and was pointing. I followed her finger down to a huge clearing below. In the middle of it stood a giant spruce tree. It had to be 80 feet tall. Do they even grow that big? I wondered. Hey. Ella was over the edge. Max fell off and jumping down the next one. I got down beside Max and helped him up before reluctantly starting to follow Ella down the steep hill. Eventually, we managed to scoot down the last part on our butts, but it was a cold and long climb, and I wasn't looking forward to going back up. Like, how do they get these trees out of here? Max asked before nearly walking straight into a massive construction crane. Ella just groaned and I shook my head. Beside the towering spruce was a wide stump left behind from what we assumed was the tree in our town square. I walked around it, counting my steps absently and watching Ella put her hand on it. It's warm, it's pulsing. I joined her, putting both my palms on the leftover wood, feeling the strange warmth emanating from it. She was right. It was pulsing. I could feel the odd thwump, thwump, thwump that felt like it came from somewhere deeper. You couldn't see it move, but you could feel it, almost like a heartbeat. This one's warm too. Max was standing under the other tree, touching the bark. Maybe that's like why there's no snow here. We looked around. A perfect circle had formed around the tree and the stump, going out maybe 20 feet. Despite the rest of the tree farm being packed with the thick white stuff, the ground around the giant tree and its lost brother was damp and bare, even green in places. Only the very top of the tree itself seemed to have snow pillowed on its branches. Whoops! Max had been walking around the tree when he kicked something accidentally. Ella and I went over to check it out. Tucked beneath the tree on one side was a pile of oranges. I crouched down and picked one up. There were oranges, nuts, a couple pomegranates, and candy. Guys, this is weird, right? Max held up an empty 4-liter jug of milk. We all stared at it. Who just left an empty jug of milk in a tree farm of all places? I think we should leave, Ella said suddenly. She'd found the lid to the milk jug a few steps away, and beside it was one of those bear-shaped squeeze bottles of honey. It was empty, and like the lid to the milk, the opening was in shreds. I don't want to be here after dark, and we need to clean up. I'd never heard her sound so panicked before. I was confused, but I wasn't about to argue, and both Max and I helped her put the fruit and nuts back. We made the pile as neat as we could before we started back up the hill. The climb absolutely sucked. Getting down had been easy. Getting back up was a nightmare. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and we never knew where the ground really was. It took the three of us dragging each other across the snow for a full hour to climb back up to the main tree farm. By the time we crossed that final ledge, I felt my own sense of panic growing. I'd turn around and see nothing behind us, but that didn't stop it from feeling like something was just waiting for one of us to fall. I don't think we even stopped to catch our breath until we got in the truck and were driving away. Back in town, we stopped at Joe's place, a little diner with a clear view of the tree in town square. We ordered burgers and milkshakes. When Max got up to go to the bathroom, Ella pulled out Rosie's notebook. She flipped through until she found an empty page at the back, then pulled out a pen and started sketching. I watched her draw the billboard, the clearing, and the spot where one tree stood, and one tree was missing. She drew the little pile of stuff Max had kicked over, making a diagram of every item. Then she drew something else, on the tree still standing. "What's that?" I asked, struggling to really eat my food. "You didn't see?" she asked, and I shook my head while she frowned. That tree was filled with spider webs. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I felt like I was going to drift off, I'd feel my skin crawl, like 100 little legs were brushing against me. It was all in my head, of course, and at some point I must have slept because I woke up with a jolt the next day. The idea that Greg told his parents about the whole drugged on Christmas Eve thing had freaked us all out. The only good thing was that no one really likes Greg's parents. I mean, they're not bad people. They're just really, really religious, the fire and brimstone kind. And it always seeps into every conversation. So while we were worried that they might start sharing with our parents, they never seemed to. After the tree farm, we waited until his parents were definitely at work to go knock on his door. If we were going to take this on, we needed all of us together. Thankfully, we'd been friends since elementary school. We knew Greg. Anytime he got upset, he needed a couple days to stew, and then he was cool. So when we filled him in on the tree farm, he was eager to join us in the town square. We wanted a closer look at the tree. "So my parents were right?" he asked, sounding as shocked as we were. "Kind of," I admitted with a shrug. "I think so anyways. I mean, can you explain how Mrs. Alps has run a store called the Button Emporium for 20 years in this place?" I couldn't. No one bought that many buttons in this town. I think I saw my mother go in there once. I'd have guessed that she was selling buttons online, but Mrs. Alps didn't even seem to own a computer. "Okay, but have you ever seen anyone doing anything shady like that? It feels like we should be seeing people in robes around a bonfire at midnight, that kind of stuff. Real cult shit." "We kinda do though," Ella suggested as we came to the tree. "What happens at the start of every December?" "Everyone comes to worship the tree," I said, almost in a whisper. I thought about every Christmas I'd been alive for. At the start of December, the town decorated the tree and everyone got together for the big light up. Hundreds of people gathered to clap for it. People sang carols, passed around snacks. New parents introduced their babies to the tree like the fucking Lion King. "I don't see anything," Ella announced, sounding disappointed as she made her way around the tree. Max had been checking too and shook his head. None of us found any spider webs. It was disappointing in a way. Guys," Greg called, waving an arm at us. "Guys!" He was tapping the notebook, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Okay, you guys remember when I had my goth phase?" Oh, we all remembered. "Weren't you like really into Ozzy? You like carried a plastic bat around?" Middle school was a little weird for all of us, I guess. Greg rolled his eyes and shoved Max away. Yeah, well, I was really into witchcraft and shit then. I wanted to piss my parents off. I got all these books on the occult, right? I actually read them, all of them. Most of it was really long and boring. "Speed it up, man," Ella said, spinning her finger in the air, to which Greg shot her a dirty look. This stuff beneath the tree, this is 100% an offering." We all exchanged looks. An offering. "To fairies," he hissed with eyes as wide as saucers. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Fairies now? Oh God. I was going to graduate school and get shipped straight to the loony bin. I might as well buy the jacket now. "Just to be clear, like Tinkerbell bullshit?" I asked between chuckles. My little sister had dressed up as one for Halloween a couple years ago. It was cute. I couldn't imagine how it had anything to do with the spiders, though. "No man, I mean real fairies. Every country has their own stories, right? They call them the Fae. And they can be really fucked up. That pile of stuff, the milk and honey, that's classic. That's like the most basic shit you'd give." By now, people were staring at Greg's arm waving, so we hustled away. "Okay, so why would Raleighs be making offerings to fairies?" I asked. "To grow big trees?" "Nah, man, that would be a waste. Nature spirits and shit would take care of the trees." "He's not wrong," Ella mumbled, already on her phone. "Milk and honey is old school. It's the first thing they suggest if you want to appease them or make a deal." We all stopped. "A deal?" I asked. "What kind of deal?" "The kind that like runs a button shop?" Max pointed at the store we'd ended up in front of. Even though it was cold out, I felt beads of sweat dripping down my back. The Button Emporium, my mother's flower shop. Ella's mom was a real estate agent in a town that frankly didn't have a lot of buying and selling going on. Most of the houses that were empty were rentals owned by the town itself. The more I looked around and thought about it, the more funhouse vibes it gave off. "You leave the offerings wherever the Fae are said to live, like gardens or fairy circles," she read aloud, and then blanched. I thought about the circle of melted snow surrounding the spot where those two giant trees grew. That definitely had to be a fairy circle. Plus, the trees were just weird, warm and humming. The trees. I spun around and started jogging back to the town square. In that moment, it was like the whole world faded around me. I could hear my friends calling me, but it was warped, like the sound came from underwater. All I could think of, all I could see, was that towering Christmas tree. It glittered under the weight of hundreds of ornaments, garland, and tinsel. I pushed past people as I made my way right to the tree, digging in my pocket for the one thing I knew could solve all of this: fire. In one smooth move, I flicked open my lighter and held it up to the tree's glistening branches. I could hear screaming behind me, people shrieking for help. I held fast, plunging the flame into the tree. I held out as long as I could before a security guard body slammed me into the ground. It was embarrassing being picked up by my dad at the police station later that day. Even worse was listening to my dad and Ella's chief of police father having a heart-to-heart. Then I had to watch him shake his head sadly at me as he unlocked the holding cell. The drive home was pure suffering. Lectures about what it means to be a man, about how community is important, please, and how I needed to set a good example for my sister. We got home and I heard everything again from my mother. Then I was sent to bed. I shut my door and put my headphones on. I didn't want to listen to them debate about what to do with me. I felt sick enough as it was. All I could think about was that tree. It didn't even get hot. It was like the flame just bent around it. My parents wouldn't take their eyes off me for days, and the closer it got to Christmas, the more freaked out I got. I didn't even have Rosie's notebook. Greg had been reading it when I went to burn down the tree. I had no phone. My dad blocked all social media on our router. All I could do was hang out with my sister and be festive. At least, that's what they thought. I did have my computer. I was supposed to do some school project during winter break, but I spent the time doing more research. I used a VPN to email anything I found to my friends. I started to dig into the newspaper again. Rosie had said that the town hated her for closing up their fireplace, and that an ordinance had been put in place against it. She was right. The newspaper published minutes from the town meetings. Several families had closed up their fireplaces after the Walshes had. It was a big fucking deal at the time. Even worse, in 1992, the town had an economic collapse. The mill shut down, and several families lost their jobs. In 1993, the mayor decreed that a working fireplace was required for all new houses, and that any changes to existing fireplaces and their chimneys was a violation of the town's heritage status. The town even offered free renovations for anyone willing to open their chimneys again. More insidious than that was when the town started a campaign to have new families move to the area. The mayor had hired some big city design firm to handle it. If we were right, someone had made a deal ages ago for the success of the town. The rules were pretty simple, and the consequences severe. When I looked up obituaries from Christmas 1991, there weren't any. So the Fae, or whatever they are, never got their sacrifice that year. That mill never reopened. Ever. To this day, the building is abandoned. Kids don't even go out there to drink. It was no wonder the mayor went all out to try and fix it. When I finally got my phone back, we were just a couple days away from Christmas Eve. Ella convinced my parents to let me go over to her house, using her father's status as a police officer as part of her good influence strategy. It worked. My dad dropped me off at her house, and after an awkward hello with her parents, Ella dragged me down to the basement. "So what's the plan?" I asked once the door shut behind us. I was itching to finalize our attack strategy. "Last supper." I looked around. Greg and Max were already there, waving from the couch. In front of them were a stack of pizzas and a PS4 hooked up to the TV. Ella saw the look on my face and elbowed me, nudging me down the stairs. I sat down, looking around and wondering why it felt so casual. "Drink up," she announced, plunking down a case of pop on the table. Ella, can't we just pour it out?" Greg asked, staring at bottle after bottle of Coke. It was all glass bottles, and there were a lot. "I said drink," she ordered, grabbing one and opening it. We all quickly followed her lead. After I got a slice of pizza in hand, Greg opened up the notebook and spread out a map of the city. He pointed at the town square. A tiny drawing of a tree had been added in green marker. "That tree, that's their totem, or something. We think it's connected to the other tree in the circle. It's like a gateway that lets the spiders come through." Ella sat there chugging an entire bottle of Coke before wiping her mouth and grabbing a bucket of rags and tossing it in the middle of the table. "The tree didn't burn right? It's probably protected by some kind of magic. So we take out the spiders instead. They're like the worker bees. They have to be weak once they're outside of the nest. We lure them in here." She tapped the map with some scissors before starting to cut the rags into strips. "The Smith's house?" I asked, realizing where they'd marked the next spot. "It's empty. No one's rented it yet. I can get the keys off the realtor lockbox. Max is going to set up his sound system inside. Those things go after anyone awake, right? In nature, spiders use vibration to hunt. That's got to be how those things know who's awake. So we lure them in. We gas the house. We light it on fire. Boom! Dead spiders." I sat back and ate, thinking about the possibility of it all working. I was thinking about what would happen to our little town. The last time no one was taken, the mill shut down. It destroyed lives. I'm not stupid. I listen when my dad watches the news. The world economy kind of sucks right now. A lot of people would kill to be in our situation. We were basically dooming everyone in our town if we did this. If we do this, our lives are never going to be the same. Our parents will all probably lose their jobs. I know, Ella said after a moment of silence. She sat back and looked around at the trophies that dotted the walls. I'm probably going to lose my scholarship. She'd already been pre-accepted to a university on a sports scholarship that, frankly, she had never even applied to. My dad's radio repair shop wouldn't survive. Max was already planning to blow up thousands of dollars in speakers. Max shrugged, opening another bottle of pop. But it's not like it's ours, right? It's fake. It's always been fake. Greg nodded his agreement, looking equally solemn. We all felt the weight of what we were about to do. We tried to go talk to the Millers. It didn't work. They called the cops on us, something about hazing. But when we were there, we saw their kids. They're all under 6. What if one of the kids is taken? Or the parents, and then whoever's left has to look after 3 kids? Is my scholarship worth someone's life? Ella shook her head. I thought about it. It's all just bribes. Everything we have is bribes, so we look away. I don't want to look away anymore. Whoever we're feeding needs to go hungry. I grabbed another bottle of pop and picked up a rag and some scissors. Ella was right. Rosie was right. I had been right. We had to do this. By the way, what's all this for? I asked, wondering why we were cutting up scraps and guzzling Coke. Molotovs, Greg answered with a grin. Christmas Eve came, and that's when I posted the first part of our story. I hit submit, and then packed my backpack full of everything I'd need for the night. Then I sat down to wait. It was probably the worst I've ever felt on a Christmas Eve. Every step in the same weird ritual my family does every year put me closer to the big event, and I had to pretend to enjoy it. My parents were already edgy. So were my friends' parents after the harassment episode with the Millers. We all had to play it cool. So I choked down dinner, put on this year's pajamas, candy cane reindeer if you're wondering, and sat down to everyone's favorite movie. Then at 8:15, we all took our magic pills, and just like last year, I saved mine to spit in the toilet. I went to bed, my jeans riding up under the pajamas. When I finally heard snoring, I checked my parents' and sister's rooms before taking off my PJs and grabbing my bag. Then I booked it, only pausing just for a moment to stick a couple of those fire pokers straight up the chimney. The first thing I did was steal the key from the realtor box on the Smith's house. We'd already dropped off all of Max's equipment and set it up. We set up the speakers, lugged in jugs of gasoline, and set up whatever traps we could. Half the house was a death trap by Christmas Eve. One wrong step and you were liable to have a bucket of knives drop down on you. There were even ball bearings set to explode from corners. We really didn't want to take any chances when it came to killing the spiders. Max got there first, getting to work on finishing any wiring and starting the process of stringing the extensions across the street to my house. Greg and Ella followed after. They brought the fire, lugging in a cooler filled with Molotovs just ready to light. Ella had her baseball bat, and Greg, What's that? I asked, staring at the thing he had strapped to his back. My dad's nail gun, Greg beamed, whipping it around so I could take a better look at it. Fairies don't like iron, right? I got the cheapest nails I could find. I made sure they got all rusty too. It sounded like a good idea at least. Next we tested the sound system, Max operating things from across the street in my living room. Somehow I picked the short straw and had to stand in the house, walkie in hand. Okay, get ready. Guys, I fucking hit the deck. It sounded like a gunshot right next to me. I swear the whole house rattled off its frame when the music hit. Nope, sounds crackly, the walkie gargled out. Crackly. I crawled to my feet and watched as Max scampered across the snow to tweak a little something in the speakers. What the hell was that? My super mix. I worked on this for days. After Max was happy, we drenched the house in gasoline, scarves over our mouths as the stench filled the air and made us all lightheaded. Then we waited. Went back to my house, checked the time, and sat around waiting. Ella laughed at the people calling me out for hating It's a Wonderful Life. We all agreed we wished the military would get involved. Then we just sort of settled down in the grim silence, listening. It took another hour before the first signs of life appeared. Ella noticed it first, pointing out the window and peering down the street. The first of the creatures were making their way to the rooftops on our street. I lived just a few blocks away from the town square, so we figured they would hit my block early. The Millers lived way farther out. If we could lure them all in before they even got out there, then no one would have to die at the Millers. We held out for a few painful minutes, watching the spiders file across the roofs. They went in groups of 3, just like Rosie said. It was terrifying, and although I'd seen them before, it was the expressions reflected on the faces of my friends that just added to my fear. I think they were all still hoping that I was crazy. I was too. Deep inside me, I hoped that we'd all just sort of made this up. "Max," Greg whispered while we all sat there in slack-jawed awe. "Max now," he hissed, and Max suddenly came to life, stuttering a little as he moved to his controls. A couple dials turned and a finger on the start button, and the Smith's house came to life. It was crazy. The whole town was dead silent except for us. I was amazed the windows didn't break, it was so loud. I sat there holding my breath as the bass vibrated the whole block. For a moment, the spiders didn't seem to notice anything. They dropped into chimneys like usual. Then suddenly, it was like the reverberations hit. Like one mass migration, they all started to move. Have you ever seen those horrible videos of someone poking a daddy-long-legs nest? It was like that, only red. "It's working!" They were all hopping down the chimney, almost fighting each other to be first. Creature after creature poured into the house. "Ella, you're up," Max said, passing her a bottle and a lighter. "Greatest pitcher in the province, right?" She nodded, lighting up the homemade Molotov and then sneaking out the front door. By now the house had to be bursting. We couldn't see any spiders outside of it. She threw the bottle with all she had and it smashed through the front room window. We'd soaked the place with so much gasoline and kindling that the place went up like a match. We stood outside my house, listening to Max's music mix at concert volume and watching spiders trying to escape the trap. We could hear explosions going off from inside the house. For a moment we stood there and cheered. It felt like we'd beaten whatever fucked up enemy we were battling. The spiders that crawled out of the place collapsed and fizzled beneath the flames. The tree might not have been flammable, but they sure were. Just as we started to debate on how we were going to explain the mess, Ella smacked me hard in the chest again. "Look!" she yelped. There were more spiders coming. Fresh spiders, new spiders, pouring out of the town square and coming straight for us. "Run!" We dove into Max's truck and he peeled away on the frosty road, driving blindly in the opposite direction. "Where do we go?" he shouted. "Rosie's house," I yelled back, staring out the back window at the red wave crawling after us. "Faster!" They were way faster than you'd expect a four-legged spider to be. "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God," Greg chanted, head in his hands. We drove as fast as we could, grateful that the rest of the town seemed to be asleep. "What if she's not up?" Ella cried. "She's awake." She had to be. There was no doubt in my mind that Rosie was awake. We just about took her fence off when we pulled up in front of her house. Max running up to the door and banging on it frantically while Ella, Greg, and I tried to drag our things out of his truck. "Get the cooler!" she shrieked, and we all started screaming and hollering for Rosie to let us in. It was like time stood still for a second. An ocean of furious creatures were closing in on us from one side, and the only safe place we knew was closed just inches from our faces. "Rosie! Jesus, someone look for a fake rock." Max was whipping apart her garden when the door finally opened, and one Rosalie Walsh looked at us like we were dancing heads. "What in God's name are you kids doing here?" she cried, then stopped, peeked past us, and started hauling us inside. She slammed the door behind us, locking every lock and chain she had on it, then bracing it. We got inside just in time. It was like a storm hit her house. The sound of dozens of spiders landing on it at once sounding like an avalanche of hail. "Idiots, you idiots, what did you do?" she cried. We stood there listening to what sounded like hundreds of angry reindeer on the roof. "We thought we'd kill the spiders." Rosie wrapped her robe tighter around her body, staring at the ceiling. Then she looked slowly at each of us. Max let out an awkward laugh and Greg just ran for the bathroom. The woman closed her eyes, shaking her head as the sounds of scratching started in the chimney. "Damn stupid fucking kids," she muttered. "Are we going to die?" asked Max. "Only if you talk too much," she spat, going to a cabinet in the living room. "I don't know if this house can withstand all of them." She opened the cabinet, revealing an armory of guns. "You kids know how to shoot. Take a weapon, and you better start praying. I've never seen this before. Should have known though when you came bothering me. Welp, now's as good a time as any to take a stand." She passed out guns, then went to her bedroom for her shotgun. "Just sit tight," and the sound of smashing glass silenced all of us. Greg's screams followed, and we all ran out from the living room. We found Rosie standing in the hallway, staring at the remains of a small boarded-up window in the bathroom. Glass shards and splatters of blood laid on the floor. "The bars fell off a few years ago," she whispered, sounding haunted. "Couldn't get someone out to fix it." We were all in shock, and so was she, but the sounds of Greg's screaming snapped us out of it. "Not again!" she shouted suddenly, and moved faster than I honestly expected a woman in her 80s could. Before we could even help her, she'd pried down the steps to the attic and was making her way up. "Get the bucket!" she ordered, and Ella looked around, spotting a heavy Home Depot bucket in the hall and grabbing it. She carried it after Rosie while Max and I carried the cooler of Molotovs. We reached the roof just as Rosie had fired off her first shot, clipping a spider in the leg. Greg was already a house away, being dragged by a group of them across the snow and Christmas lights. "That's right, you nasty little pieces of shit," Rosie cried, ripping the top off the bucket. It was filled with bullets. "You're not taking any more on my watch. Come and get it." Ella shoved the gun she'd taken into my hands and opened the cooler. "Max, start lighting," she shouted, then took the first Molotov and tossed it as hard as she could. It hit one of the spiders, carrying Greg square in the body. The screech it let out burned my ears, but it dropped him. The others struggled to balance his weight, and Greg rolled off the roof into the bushes below. Suddenly, it was all-out war. I can't really say how long we were up on that roof. It felt like hours, maybe days, but with how late it was, I think it wasn't that long at all. Usually I wasn't so much as a bug squasher, but that night it was all I could do to keep firing off shots. It felt like they were never ending. Luckily, they were incredibly fragile. Ella rained down literal fire behind Greg as he made his way to safety, and the rest of us kept the spiders at bay on the roof. There were close calls. We all have weird scars that I don't think will ever go away. But we made it. The battle ended just as fast as it seemed to start. 1 minute we were watching those strange four-legged nightmares curling up into balls and falling to the ground, and the next they all seemed to just crumble away. We were all stunned. The onslaught had just kept coming, wave after wave, and now they were dust in the wind. "What time is it?" Rosie asked, and I fumbled for my phone. 12:01, I answered, then really thought about that. It was after midnight. Technically, it was Christmas morning now. "Are they gone?" We all hesitated, looking around at our quiet town before putting down our weapons. Rosie just shook her head, suddenly looking drained, and stepped back into the attic. For a moment I felt a burst of exhausted excitement bubble up inside me. I could tell my friends felt it too. Max let out a small, soft woo and pumped his fist while Ella punched me in the arm. We grabbed the last of our supplies and made our way down through Rosie's house, talking the whole way. It was that nervous, excited chatter you did when something big had just happened. We were all tired. It was late. We still had so much to clean up. But we had defeated the spiders, and from the way they came at us, I doubted they had managed to divert any resources to stealing someone. It felt like we had actually managed to protect the town. Downstairs, Ella was putting the bucket back where she found it and helping Max to put the guns away, all while telling Rosie about how badass she was. We were gibbering at the woman all at once, at least until Ella made a noise that I didn't like. I looked over at her, crouched beside Rosie's recliner. "I think she's dead," she whispered, fingers to her neck. We all rushed over to check. We felt for a pulse, put Ella's compact beneath her nose and tried CPR, but she was gone. "Maybe she had a heart attack," Max suggested as we all wiped away tears. "What do we do?" I grabbed the Afghan off the back of her chair and wrapped it around her. Then I set her favorite gun in that magazine pouch, just as she always had it. We cleaned up the glass and made sure the attic was locked. Then we picked up her phone and dialed 911. No one would be coming anytime soon, but we had to hope that the call would be logged somewhere and it would happen. I made sure we grabbed Rosie's box of stuff before we left. Rosie had spent most of her life battling the nightmare that plagued our town. I didn't want all her efforts to disappear. We'd inherited it now, after all. It might have been Christmas morning, but it was so early that everyone but us was still asleep. After the battle we'd just had, it was amazingly peaceful to just walk down the street knowing we had the whole place to ourselves. Of course, the first place we went was to see the tree in town square. I couldn't help but feel nervous walking up. We hadn't directly seen it, but were pretty sure the spiders had come from the tree. So when we walked up and saw the formerly green tree had turned brown, we were elated. The tree looked like the crappy trees people threw out at the end of the season. Ornaments had started to fall off. Even as we stood there, a few baubles hit the ground and broke. We also noticed we couldn't hear Max's music mix playing anymore and made our way back to my house. The one thing I'm thankful for is that it snowed incredibly heavily. We always have snow on Christmas, but the weather this year was crazy. With how overboard we went on the gasoline, we were lucky that the weather was so bad that the massive fire at the Smith's house didn't spread. Instead, it was one big black smoky smoldering mass when we returned. We cleaned up the cable still connected to my house, shoved Max's leftover equipment into his truck, and then said goodbye. Max took Greg and Ella home, and I went upstairs to sleep. This year I woke up on Christmas feeling happy. When I looked outside at the Smith's house, I felt relieved. I played the "What Did Santa Bring Us" game with my sister and watched her dive into her presents while our parents stood at the window, frozen, staring outside at the mess across the street. It didn't take long for the gossip train to run, and as we were eating this year's slightly burned feast of cinnamon buns and eggs Benedict, my mother sat there in shock listening to one of her friends talk about the tree going brown. I heard my parents talking about it in hushed whispers, and for once, the local police actually came to visit the house across the street. It's been a few days since Christmas Eve. I've slept a lot, trying to use up what winter vacation I have left to catch up on a year of bad sleep. I've made notes of my own in Rosie's notebook, organized the box, and wrote out everything you saw here. Ella checked on Rosie's place and said a neighbor told her that the paramedics came and broke down the door. We expect to see her kids coming into town any day now. As for the town itself, things are strange. People panicked when they saw the tree went brown. I mean full-scale, weeping in public panic. The mayor's office tried to declare a state of emergency, but when pushed for why, had to roll it back. Yesterday, my mother received a call canceling this year's New Year's Eve party flower order. Budget cuts. Honestly, I wish I could say that I feel like this is the end, but Greg made a really good point when we talked after Christmas. There's still one tree standing back at Raleigh's Tree Farm. I think we're going to have to find a way to destroy it. I just don't know when or how. Plus, I'm certain we've pissed something off. Something or someone on the other side of that circle is going hungry this year. For now, though, I'm just going to stay home and sleep. I don't think I can deal with any more crazy spiders this year.